It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and the house was unusually still. The kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of every creak in the floorboards, every tick of the clock, and every breath you take. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the closet door, my heart pounding in my chest. The idea had been brewing in my mind for weeks, maybe even months, but today felt different. Today, I was going to do it. I was going to dress as my sister to fool my mom. The thought alone sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just about the clothes, though that was a big part of it. It was about the freedom, the thrill, the chance to step into someone else's skin, even if just for a little while. My sister, Emily, was everything I wasn't. Confident, stylish, effortlessly feminine. She had this way of carrying herself that made heads turn wherever she went. And me? Well, I was just me. Quiet, awkward, and perpetually stuck in my own head. But today, I was going to change that. At least for a little while. Emily was away at college, and her room was like a treasure trove waiting to be explored. She had left behind a wardrobe full of clothes, shoes, and accessories that she no longer needed. I had been in her room a few times since she left, always under the guise of borrowing a book or looking for something, but really, I was just soaking in the essence of her. The way her room smelled like her perfume, the way her clothes hung in the closet, waiting to be worn. It was intoxicating. I took a deep breath and stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly. I walked down the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached Emily's door, I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. This was it. No turning back now. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room was exactly as she had left it, neat and tidy, with a few posters on the walls and a collection of makeup on her dresser. I walked over to the closet and opened it, my eyes scanning the rows of dresses, skirts, and blouses. My heart was racing now, and I could feel the sweat forming on my palms. I reached out and touched a soft, floral dress, the fabric smooth against my fingertips. It was one of Emily's favorites, and I had seen her wear it countless times. I pulled it off the hanger and held it up to my body, looking at myself in the mirror. The dress was a little shorter on me than it was on her, but it fit surprisingly well. I felt a rush of excitement as I slipped it on, the fabric sliding over my skin like a second layer. Next, I rummaged through her drawers, finding a pair of tights and a bra. I stuffed the bra with some tissue paper to give it a more realistic shape and pulled the tights up over my legs. The sensation was strange, but not unpleasant. I felt a strange sense of euphoria as I looked at myself in the mirror, the dress hugging my body in all the right places. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to complete the look. I sat down at Emily's vanity and opened her makeup bag, pulling out a foundation, some eyeliner, and a tube of lipstick. I had watched her do her makeup enough times to have a vague idea of what to do, but I was still nervous. What if I messed it up? What if I looked ridiculous? I took a deep breath and started with the foundation, blending it into my skin as best as I could. It felt strange, the cool cream against my face, but I kept going. I lined my eyes with the eyeliner, my hand shaking slightly as I tried to get it just right. Finally, I applied the lipstick, a deep red that Emily always wore when she wanted to make a statement. I pressed my lips together and looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the person staring back at me. The dress, the makeup, the way my hair fell just so. It was like I had transformed into someone else entirely. Someone confident, someone beautiful, someone who could turn heads just by walking into a room. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to see if I could fool my mom. I took a deep breath and stood up, smoothing out the dress with my hands. I walked over to the door and opened it, stepping out into the hallway. The house was still quiet, and I could hear the faint sound of the TV coming from the living room. My mom was probably in there, watching one of her favorite shows. I walked down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Each step felt like a mile, and I could feel the sweat forming on my brow. What if she saw through me? What if she knew it was me all along? But I had come too far to turn back now. I reached the living room and paused in the doorway, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. My mom was sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to the TV. She didn't notice me at first, and I took the opportunity to strike a pose, leaning against the doorframe with one hand on my hip. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to mimic Emily's voice as best as I could. My mom turned to look at me, her eyes widening in surprise. "Emily, what are you doing here? I thought you were at college." I felt a rush of adrenaline as I realized she had fallen for it. "Oh, I just came home for a quick visit," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I missed you." My mom smiled and stood up, walking over to me. "Well, it's so good to see you. You look beautiful as always." I felt a strange mix of emotions as she hugged me. On one hand, I was thrilled that she had believed me, but on the other hand, I felt a pang of guilt. I was deceiving her after all, but I pushed that thought aside, focusing on the thrill of the moment. We sat down on the couch, and my mom started asking me about school, about my classes, about my friends. I answered as best as I could, trying to keep up the charade. It was harder than I thought it would be, trying to remember all the little details about Emily's life, but I managed to keep up the act. After a while, my mom got up to make some tea, and I took the opportunity to slip away. I went back to Emily's room and closed the door behind me, leaning against it as I let out a long breath. My heart was still racing, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I looked at myself in the mirror again, the person staring back at me still a stranger, but a stranger I was starting to like. I felt a sense of freedom, of liberation, that I had never felt before. It was like I had discovered a new part of myself, a part that had been hidden away for far too long. But as the adrenaline started to fade, I felt a pang of guilt again. I had fooled my mom, but at what cost? I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. Eventually, the truth would come out, and I would have to face the consequences. But for now, I was going to enjoy this moment. I was going to enjoy the feeling of being someone else, even if just for a little while. I took one last look at myself in the mirror, a small smile playing on my lips, before I started to take off the dress, the makeup, the persona. But as I did, I knew that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I had tasted freedom, and I wasn't going to let it go so easily. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to explore this side of myself, no matter what. And as I slipped back into my own clothes, I felt a sense of determination that I had never felt before. This was just the first step, and I was ready to take the next one, whatever it might be. The next few days passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had done, about the way it had felt to be someone else, even if just for a little while. I found myself sneaking into Emily's room more and more, trying on her clothes, experimenting with her makeup. It was like an addiction, and I couldn't get enough. But I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. Eventually, Emily would come home, and I would have to face the reality of what I had done. I didn't know how she would react, or how my mom would react if she found out. But I couldn't stop myself. I was drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. One evening, as I was sitting in Emily's room, trying on a pair of her heels, I heard a noise outside the door. My heart skipped a beat as I realized someone was coming. I quickly kicked off the heels and scrambled to hide the clothes, but it was too late. The door opened and there stood my mom. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. I felt a lump form in my throat as I tried to come up with an excuse, but nothing came out. I just stood there, frozen, as my mom walked into the room, her eyes scanning the mess of clothes and makeup. Is this what you've been doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. I felt a wave of shame wash over me, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The secret was out, and there was no going back now. My mom sat down on the bed, her hands trembling as she looked at me. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "I don't know," I said finally. I just wanted to see what it would be like to be someone else, even if just for a little while." My mom looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "You know you don't have to be someone else to be loved, right?" she said softly. "You're perfect just the way you are." I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I realized the truth in her words. I didn't have to be Emily to be loved. I didn't have to be anyone else. I just had to be me. My mom stood up and walked over to me, pulling me into a tight hug. "I love you no matter what," she whispered. "And I always will." I hugged her back, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The secret was out, and I didn't have to hide anymore. I could be myself, whoever that was, and I would still be loved. As I stood there, holding on to my mom, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I could be true to myself, no matter what that meant. And I was ready to embrace it, with open arms. The days that followed were a mix of emotions. My mom and I had several long talks, and while she was still trying to understand everything, she was supportive. She told me that she loved me no matter what, and that she just wanted me to be happy. It was more than I could have hoped for, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Emily came home for a visit a few weeks later, and I knew I had to tell her the truth. I was nervous, but I knew it was the right thing to do. When I finally sat her down and explained everything, she was quiet for a long time. I braced myself for the worst, but then she smiled. "I always knew you were a little weird," she said with a laugh. "But seriously, I'm just glad you're being true to yourself. And if you ever want to borrow my clothes, just ask. No need to sneak around." I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I realized that Emily was on my side too. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I felt a sense of freedom that I had never felt before. As time went on, I started to explore this side of myself more openly. I started to experiment with my own style, mixing elements of Emily's wardrobe with my own. I started to feel more confident in my own skin, more comfortable with who I was. And while there were still challenges and there were still people who didn't understand, I knew that I was on the right path. I was finally being true to myself, and that was all that mattered. Looking back, I realized that dressing as my sister to fool my mom had been the catalyst for a journey of self-discovery. It had been the first step in a long, winding path towards understanding and accepting myself. And while it hadn't been easy, it had been worth it. As the weeks turned into months, my journey of self-discovery continued to unfold in ways I never could have imagined. The initial thrill of dressing as Emily had been a gateway, but it was only the beginning. I began to explore my identity more deeply, questioning the boundaries of gender and self-expression that had been imposed on me for so long. It was a confusing, exhilarating, and sometimes terrifying process, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to keep going, keep exploring, keep learning. My mom's initial shock had given way to a quiet, steady support. She didn't always understand what I was going through, but she made an effort to listen and learn. One evening, she surprised me by handing me a small gift bag. Inside was a beautiful scarf, soft and silky, in a shade of deep purple that I loved. "I thought you might like this," she said with a tentative smile. "It reminded me of you." I was touched by the gesture. It wasn't just the scarf, it was the fact that she was trying. She was acknowledging this part of me, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. I wrapped the scarf around my neck and hugged her tightly, feeling a surge of gratitude. Emily, too, became an unexpected ally. She started sending me photos of outfits she thought I might like, along with links to online stores that sold gender-neutral or feminine clothing. "You have better legs than I do," she joked in one text. "You should show them off more." Her support meant the world to me. It wasn't just about the clothes or the makeup, it was about the acceptance, the validation. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't alone in this journey. But not everyone was as understanding. My dad, for instance, was a different story. He was a traditional man, set in his ways, and the idea of his son exploring femininity was something he couldn't wrap his head around. We had a few tense conversations, and while he never outright rejected me, there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. It hurt, but I tried to focus on the people who were supporting me rather than the ones who weren't. School was another challenge. I had always been a bit of a loner, but now I felt even more isolated. I started experimenting with my appearance, wearing subtle touches of makeup or more androgynous clothing, but I was constantly aware of the whispers and stares. Some people were curious, others were judgmental, and a few were outright cruel. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself that their opinions didn't matter, but it was hard. Some days I just wanted to hide. But then there were the good days. The days when I felt confident and beautiful, when I could look in the mirror and see not just the person I was, but the person I was becoming. Those days made everything else worth it. One of those good days came when I decided to take a big step. I went out in public dressed as myself for the first time. It wasn't a full transformation, just a pair of skinny jeans, a flowy blouse, and a bit of mascara, but it was enough to make me feel like I was finally being true to myself. I went to a coffee shop on the other side of town, where I was less likely to run into anyone I knew. The barista smiled at me and called me ma'am, and I felt a rush of euphoria that I couldn't put into words. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. As I sat there, sipping my latte and watching the world go by, I realized how far I had come. It wasn't just about the clothes or the makeup. It was about the courage to be myself, to embrace who I was, even when the world didn't understand. It was about finding my own voice, my own identity, in a world that had always tried to tell me who I should be. But the journey wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. I started doing more research, reading about gender identity and expression, and connecting with others who were going through similar experiences. I joined online communities where I could share my thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment, and I found a sense of belonging that I had never known before. One day, I stumbled upon a local LGBTQ+ support group. I was nervous about going. What if I didn't belong? What if they didn't accept me? But I decided to give it a try. The first meeting was overwhelming, but in a good way. There were people of all ages, genders, and backgrounds, each with their own story to tell. I listened as they shared their experiences, their struggles, and their triumphs, and I felt a sense of kinship that I had never felt before. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook, but I told my story. I talked about dressing as Emily, about the journey I had been on, and about the person I was becoming. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then the room erupted into applause. I felt a lump in my throat as I realized that I wasn't alone. I was part of a community, a family, and that gave me strength. As the months went by, I started to feel more and more comfortable in my own skin. I began to experiment with my style, mixing masculine and feminine elements in a way that felt authentic to me. I cut my hair into a sleek, androgynous style and started wearing clothes that made me feel confident and powerful. I even started using a new name, Alex, a name that felt like it fit me better than my old one. Not everyone understood and not everyone accepted me, but that was okay. I had learned that I didn't need everyone's approval. All I needed was to be true to myself. One of the most transformative moments came when I decided to come out to my closest friends. I had been keeping this part of myself hidden from them for so long, afraid of how they would react, but I knew I couldn't keep it a secret forever. I invited them over one evening, my heart pounding as I prepared to tell them the truth. When the moment came, I took a deep breath and said, "There's something I need to tell you." I explained my journey, my struggles, and my identity, and when I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, one by one, they hugged me and told me they loved me. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. As I continued to grow and evolve, I realized that this journey wasn't just about me. It was about breaking down barriers, challenging stereotypes, and creating a world where everyone could be themselves without fear. I started volunteering with LGBTQ+ organizations, sharing my story and advocating for acceptance and equality. It was my way of giving back, of helping others who might be going through the same struggles I had faced. Looking back, I could hardly believe how much had changed. The boy who had once sneaked into his sister's room to try on her clothes was gone, replaced by someone who was confident, proud, and unapologetically themselves. It hadn't been an easy journey, but it had been worth it. Every tear, every fear, every moment of doubt had led me to this place, this moment, where I could stand tall and say, "This is who I am." And as I looked to the future, I felt a sense of hope and excitement. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew that whatever it was, I would face it as myself. No more hiding, no more pretending. Just me, Alex, living my truth and embracing every moment of this beautiful, messy, incredible journey called life. Thank you so much for watching till now. It means the world to have you here. This community is all about empowering each other and celebrating the incredible journeys of everyone on their path to living authentically. If you're ever feeling lost or alone, remember you have a whole family here for you. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and let's keep inspiring each other, sending you all the love and strength in the world. Until next time, live your life by your rules.